Hello, I'm State Representative Janine Nodder, and you're watching Chattin' with Janine. My guest this week is Representative Doug Thomas of Londonderry, who is also the Vice Chair of the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee in Concord. Hi, Doug. Welcome to my show.
Well, thank you, Janine, and thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be talking to you.
Well, this is your first time on my show in Merrimack, but over the years I've had other shows, and I used to co-host a show with Representative Al Baldessaro, so I know you've been on that show with us.
I have, yes.
At least twice, I think.
I have, yes. Mm-hmm. It's a good show.
So now you're on this side of the river.
That's right, thank you.
And we miss Al.
I know. He's sunning himself in Florida right now.
Yes, I know. He's got to keep that tan going and make us all jealous.
I know. You know, I almost moved to Merrimack when I first got out of the service. Actually bought a house here and then decided it was a little too far from where I was working at the time. So I was almost a resident here, but we settled in Salem first and then Londonderry.
Oh, wow. We'll see what you missed out.
Yeah. Missed out meeting you earlier.
So you're in your fourth term, I believe?
I am going on my 8th year and planning to do one more at least.
And every term you've been on Science, Technology, and Energy?
I have. I remember my freshman year was, the chairman was Bob Introne, was my mentor, and he was from Londonderry, and he kind of helped me along, and I missed him.
And then we had Dick Berry, who is from Merrimack.
Mm-hmm. Very close relationship between Merrimack and Londonderry on the Science and Tech Committee.
We just have that river, and Litchfield in between.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, I've been on Science, Technology, and Energy as long as you have. But my first 2 terms I was on State and Federal Relations and Veterans Affairs, which was good for me because I still had little kids at home.
That's right.
So, young kids.
I was interested to be in that committee because at the time I felt that energy would become an important part of the state, and boy, was I right. It has been probably 90% of all our bills in the last 6 years have all been about energy of some form or another. Very important subject, and continues to be very important.
And a very contentious subject because the kind of energy that we use is always up for debate. And I went to an energy conference in Las Vegas. My husband went with me, and so did our chairman, Representative Michael Vose, and Representative Bob Green went as well. We just learned so much. So this notepad you see, it's completely filled with notes that I took at the conference, and I also read several books that they gave me. They gave me books, all kinds of things. There's all topics of energy, topics of science. We even talked about birds and, birds eating plastic. And, well, it's not necessarily a bad thing for the bird to eat a little piece of plastic because they have a gizzard and they need something hard in there to break up the food. So if they can't find a rock, a little piece of plastic will do. So that was kind of interesting because it was shocking. Like, what do you mean, letting a bird eat plastic? It's like that last thing they should do. But no, it does have a place.
Right. Well, our energy situation is interesting because seems to be 2 sides of a faction, and I believe somewhere in the middle might be the right way to go. But I believe that there's been a lot of emphasis on one side that doesn't quite work, and I think you'll find out soon during this conversation what's happening as a result of that. And then there's the other side that says, well, it doesn't exist at all, and that's not right. We all know that there's changing in our climate.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's always been changing climate. Back as start of history.
That's right, and we all know that at least in a regional effect, humans can affect what they do. We know that because of the smog problem they had in Great Britain way back in the 50s.
Oh, Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles County.
We know all of that, but we also know that over the billions of years of Earth history, the Earth has gone through a lot of climatic changes and phases. So I think there's a happy medium in there somewhere where we can coexist with existing fuel, the new energy that we're going forward. There's a niche for each one of them. There's a place for each one.
Mm-hmm. Well, who the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You've heard that. So we have one group of scientists who are the squeaky wheel, and they get the grease. Everyone knows their side. But there are tens of thousands of scientists in the world that disagree. No, they might not disagree that, yeah, the climate's changing. It's always changing. This is nothing new. This goes back for centuries, the climate changing, where we have warmer periods and colder periods. What they disagree on is how much effect we're having on it. Now, I spent the first 7 years of my life breathing smog. I run marathons. And the air in New Hampshire is so much better. It's so much better. I don't know why anybody would want to spend all that money and tax us to death to fix a problem that is so small and would have such a little effect.
Well, you're right. New Hampshire's contribution to any amount of pollution is so infinitesimally small compared to the country, and more importantly, compared to the rest of the world. You know, the U.S. is only responsible for approximately 15% of the CO2 emissions of the entire world. Mm-hmm. You put Europe and China and India together, and they pollute much more. And so our contribution contributes very little to whatever improvement that the world body wants. But the expense that is being used to put us into the category is really one reason why our energy prices are so high. There are other reasons too of a more current nature, which we can get into later, but it is a lot of money being spent for very little return, and I believe that there is a happy medium. Mm-hmm. You know, we can live with the new type of energy, the new renewable energies. I think we have a place for that. We should have a place for that. They should be used, but I don't think that they can be used 100% of the time.
Oh, they absolutely can't. In fact, okay, I have this page marked. Replacing 4 conventional power plants would necessitate a wind farm the size of Rhode Island. So wind, of course, is one source of energy. To replace all conventional power plants require land larger than the state of California. So that was just one thing. So wind is one source of energy. You know, they have to, where do they get the parts to build it? See, there's all these questions that don't get answered. How long do they last? What do you do with them when they're no longer in service? Can they be recycled? Then we have solar. So, I mean, how reliable is solar? If the sun's not shining, is it producing?
Well, that's right.
Snow, if they're dirty, if it's too hot, 70 degrees is the best temperature for solar power.
Right. Solar works fine on a limited basis until it doesn't, like you say, when the sun doesn't shine or when they're covered by snow. That's why we need to have backups for them. Batteries right now are improving, but they're just not there. I mean, they just don't have.
And how much space does a battery take?
Well,
we just had this discussion in our committee just recently. We talked about the batteries the size of a Big Mac truck in every neighborhood.
Well, for one house, maybe.
Oh, and yes, and how if we had all these batteries, it would only serve for like 3 hours, I believe.
There is, I believe I saw that there were some Tesla batteries out there that could supply power to a house for a few days, but that depends on how much power you're using in your house. I mean, whenever someone talks about how much your electricity is going to cost, some people use an average of 600, kilowatt hours.
Here we go with the kilowatts.
That's
we get picked on by the other
That's
reps.
like gallons. That's like gallons per mile.
Okay. There you go. Gallon. We should say that on the house floor.
But some houses use twice as much in a month. So therefore, it depends on how much you actually use. But right now we're not there yet, and therein lies a problem that we're facing pretty soon, because I believe we've been a little bit too overzealous in wanting more renewables than what our grid can stand, and because of that, we have some old power plants that have shut down that's caused us to lose a lot of power that the grid needs.
Now, why do they call them renewables? I think unreliables are more accurate term.
Well, renewables means that the sun always shines somewhere. The sun will never go dark, at least not in my lifetime.
Okay.
But the fact that it doesn't get used up, so sunlight doesn't get used up, but it only produces when it's shining. At night, we have other things that we have to worry about. And wind is the same way. Wind works only when it's blowing. And in fact, dichotomy is that there are times when the wind is blowing too hard and wind turbines have to be shut down. Otherwise, they will become damaged. They'll overgenerate. They'll break. So so there's a narrow window of when the wind is blowing that wind turbines become most effective.
Yeah, and 1.4 million birds and bats are killed each year by the wind turbines.
That's a fact that our news media doesn't seem to want to promote too much of.
I mean, what's the ecological effect if the birds we don't have enough, if they go extinct or become endangered?
Yeah, I believe if that was heavily promoted, I think people might be thinking, hey, how come we are killing these birds? And it's a fact. They are flying through them.
Bats eat mosquitoes.
They do.
I like bats.
Yeah.
I don't want them to bite me, but yeah. And then their hydro. Hydro is another source of power, but
It's a clean source.
But if there's a drought, what good is hydro?
Yeah, that's why they have dams in the area. You know, we do get a lot of our power from Hydro Quebec, and we could have had more, but that project wasn't.
Right, the people in the North Country didn't want it. They said it would mar the landscape. I'm like, but you have those ugly wind turbines up there, and those are ugly.
Yeah, so that's kind of created a kind of a issue right now, and something that I kind of wanted to get into as to what's happening now for the benefit of our viewers. We mentioned the word grid before.
Grid.
We have the way power is distributed amongst the country is we're divided into 4 major grids, which means that we're parsed out, and power is controlled by a quasi-federal agency called ISO, Independent Systems Operator, and they were and they're overseen by another federal agency called FERC. But
Merrimack knows about FERC, but
yes.
could you? It's federal.
Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, I believe is what it is, and they were formed back in the 90s to monitor and control the power flow. So in our area, it's called ISO New England, and it controls 6 states. And a grid, if I may, the way you might view a grid is, suppose you were building a huge model railroad system and you wanted to run 6 different tracks, 6 different trains. We have 6 states in New England. A model railroad of such a scale, you need more than one transformer to power the entire track system. So you would add transformers so you keep the power steady throughout the entire track system. If you start taking away those transformers, but you still want to run 6 trains, it's not going to work. So what happens on one side of the track affects the other side of the track, or grid, and so therefore you need all those power sources operating to keep the grid healthy. We've adopted a policy where it's forced a lot of our old power plants to disengage. And the replacement of them has been some renewable energy, but the amount of power that we have lost due to shutdowns, even with the power that's coming online with renewables, isn't enough to replace what we took out. And that's if they were all completed. Many projects, a substantial number of projects, according to ISO New England, never reach completion. And those that are on the drawing board, like potentially offshore wind power, they're years away.
And extremely expensive.
Very expensive, and they're years away. So what has happened is ISO New England, for the first time ever, has issued a notice to its entire grid, all of the utilities, to be ready for rolling blackouts. Now, it's important to note that our utilities do not generate any power. We went through divestiture a few years ago.
And what does all that mean? What does rolling blackouts mean? What does divestiture mean?
Well, divestiture was, in the rest of the country, power utilities own power plants. They own whatever power plant they have. There could be a gas power plant, could be oil power plant.
So Eversource,
in some cases, they used to own nuclear power plants.
Oh, yeah,
And
California, San Onofre.
And so because they own them, they could control the power. And it was in their interest to keep those power plants operating in an efficient manner, because if they didn't, their customers could suffer, and even though they're regulated, you don't want customers to be mad at you because you couldn't have power. But it was thought back then that if you took the power plants away from utilities and used them as a private entity, the market would make energy cheaper. That didn't happen. So where we are now is our electric utilities do not control the power generation. Private companies control power generation. But what ISO New England does is they monitor and they control the amount of power that can be fed into the grid. They control the power generators. They also control all of the transmission lines. The transmission lines are different than distribution lines. Distribution lines are the poles you see along the highway. They're controlled by our electric company. But the transmission lines are the big towers that cut through the state, and and they transport the majority of the power so it can be fed through all of the distribution. What's happened is ISO New England has projected into the future how much power generation is coming online and how much we're losing.
And it's not enough.
And they're saying that in the next, not this winter, we've had a relatively good winter, but in the next year or two, certainly within the next 3 years, there will be a time when if we have a very cold winter where we have to turn up our thermostats and everyone is home and maybe the school's closed and everyone's turning up their heat, there won't be enough capacity to generate the power that's needed. So what they've told the electric companies to do is they've told them to start preparing and planning for how they would meet this crisis. Should an emergency arise, ISO New England would tell the power companies. It's not the power company's decision. It's ISO New England's decision. They would tell the power companies, okay, you have to have 5% reduction in power being transmitted out, because our local companies here do control the power that's being pushed out. They just don't control the generation of it. And they'll say, we need a 5% reduction or we'll need a 10% reduction now. And what will happen is the utilities will start cutting breakers, and certain areas of the state will go dark for maybe an hour or two, possibly 3.
3 is a long time on a
then,
freezing cold winter day
and
to
then
have
they'll
no power.
then they'll rearrange their breakers. The power will come back onto that area, and will go to the next area of the state, and they'll lose power. And that's why it's called rolling. It just goes around. Now, if after they complete that circuit, if they still need the emergency situation, they'll start it all over again. And ISO New England has said that this has become not if, but when. We don't know when, but if there is a severe winter, this
Or a very
will
hot
happen.
summer day. There goes the
Well, the hot
AC.
summer day isn't that much of a problem because, again, the reason that we have this situation is a lack of fuel diversity.
Right.
And what that
so
means,
we talked about wind, solar, and hydro, but then
Right.
the other, and biomass, and then there's
well, we
natural
have like
gas and nuclear.
Yeah, this state right now, we're over 50% reliant on natural gas to power our power plants. Unfortunately, when pipelines were put into this area way back, they were not designed to produce electricity. They were designed to push gas for heating. Heating is always a priority. That's why electricity goes high in the wintertime, because in the wintertime, and because we have so much natural gas that we rely on, the price of natural gas for powering electric plants is much higher than in the summertime, because more gas is being used to heat homes, and the capacity is taken up by home heating. And if you want to buy more gas, it's much higher because supply and demand. Mm-hmm. In the summertime, you're not heating your homes. So there's a lot of gas capacity that the electric gas plants can draw from, so the gas is cheaper. So that's why summer isn't as big of an issue as winter is.
Well, that's interesting. You did a good job of explaining all that, too.
I tried.
Yeah.
It's actually much more complicated. There's market factors involved, which we cannot get into. It's just way too complicated. But
Right.
It is just a very complex system, and ISO New England is the agency that manages that for the entire grid.
Well, they have rolling blackouts already in California, and it's miserable. It doesn't sound like a first world nation when you have rolling blackouts and there's not enough power. And I don't want to be without power. It's
Well, no,
who does?
that's what I mean is that when we have an over-reliance on renewable energy, there's a price to pay besides actual dollars and cents. And I believe that we've gone too fast, and we've made it so many of our power plants have had to shut down early because of market factors, or because they were just told we don't want you anymore. And I believe that if the public knew just how tenuous renewable energy was, they might rethink certain goals. I mean, I know there are a lot of bills that have come through the House that say we should go to 100% renewable by, say, 2025.
No, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
To go 100% means you have no backup. And that's what's happening to Europe right now. In fact, we can get into a situation now where I can explain why prices are so high right now because of what Europe did.
We got 6.5 minutes left. This show went by really, really fast.
Yeah.
So to replace all gasoline vehicles with battery-powered vehicles is absurd because it would take even more wind and solar to generate additional electricity required to charge batteries. Wind and solar can't even replace coal-fired or natural gas power plants. So,
well, you think about it. Look how many solar panels you need to put on your house roof just to power your one house. That square footage in a power plant would be able to power hundreds of homes.
Right.
In terms of square footage.
And New York City could use every electrical grid-sized battery in existence, and it's not enough storage to keep lights on for 1 hour. These are just my notes from that conference. It takes 9,000 pounds of mining to make 1,000 battery, electric vehicle battery, digging and moving between 200,000 and 500,000 pounds of earth. An average 500,000 pounds per battery, moving the earth around. I was reading this out loud. I was reading it from a book, and my son said, "That's what's killing the earth."
Don't get me wrong. I'm not proposing that we should
I know
be belching out coal and oil in the air.
Yeah.
But natural gas is the cleanest form of fossil fuel. It does pollute a little bit, but it's the cleanest form. And because of our fuel or lack of fuel diversity, we've relied so much on natural gas because it's the best form of backup for what we have out there.
Of course,
but we just don't have that
nuclear
capacity.
power doesn't have any carbon emissions, none.
Nuclear power, the new technology of nuclear power, I feel, is the wave of the future if people can just get over the bad publicity that the movies and news media has presented since the 1950s. There is called small-scale nuclear is being developed now. In fact, the Air Force is buying a small-scale nuclear reactor to power Eielson Air Force Base up in Alaska. It's cleaner. It produces far less nuclear waste, and it's small because you can almost put it in this room. You could put a small-scale nuclear module that could power a whole town, say, or maybe an area. It wouldn't be nearly as large as Seabrook is, but it would be cleaner.
Seabrook is the nuclear power plant in New Hampshire. There was supposed to be 2 reactors. There's only 1 because of the protesters.
We need
Again,
to look
the
at that.
squeaky wheel got the grease.
In fact, we have a bill that we hope the Senate passes that would study the possibility of nuclear energy in the state, the new types, not
right,
not
and the
types.
spent rods can be recycled and reused. I learned that.
I believe that's true. That's right. It's excitingly new technology. It's expensive, but it produces 0 pollutants. 0.
Well, carbon is also important for plants to grow. And when the earth was warmer and there was more carbon, they had the bigger plants. Greenland was green, sort of uninhibitable. There's so much to learn. And we're still learning every day, and it's fascinating. I didn't think that I would like this committee when I was first put on it because I didn't know what any of you were talking about. But I
Gets interesting
learning
every year.
so much. I'm still learning more every day, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So.
One point I would like to make, and this was a lesson learned from Massachusetts, we have had a lot of bills come through that say, hey, how about if we just say the state's goal is 50% renewables by a certain year, or maybe 30% by a certain year, and people say, well, what's wrong with that? It's only a goal. You know, if we don't meet it, we can try hard to meet it, but if we don't, what's the harm? Well, unfortunately, the Massachusetts found out the hard way. They passed certain goals there, and they found out that they couldn't reach them because it was untenable, and they said, okay, well, we can't meet them, so what? The Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that, you passed legislation that said your goal was a certain percent, you must meet that goal. So Massachusetts is scurrying now to do that, and because of that, they're putting in expensive renewables, price of electricity is going high. I don't want that for the state.
Neither do I.
We need a measured approach. We need renewables. We need dispatchable fuel, which is reliable, which is like natural gas. You know, I wouldn't propose we build any new coal or oil fired plants, but I propose that we keep those we do right now. Otherwise, we'll be in the same position as California's in.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this show went by really quickly. And
It did.
Thank you. Thank you for coming across the river. And I'll see you in Concord next week.
At session, we'll see you then.
Oh, yeah. We're going back to Reps Hall. So thank you for watching, and I'll be back